The ocean looks the same as it always has. From above, nothing appears disturbed. The surface breathes slowly, rising and falling under a pale sky. Light fractures across the water, breaking into shifting patterns that vanish almost as soon as they form. To an untrained eye, this place feels calm. Empty even. A vast blue space waiting to be explored. But calm in the wild is often a disguise. Beneath the surface, movement does not announce itself. It slides. It waits. It holds its distance from the light. Here, life does not rush forward. It conserves energy. It listens. Every current carries information. Every vibration matters. Survival depends on noticing what others miss. In these waters, nothing moves without reason. There are moments when the ocean feels crowded with presence, even when nothing is visible. A subtle pressure, a sense that space is being measured, not occupied. As if something is tracing invisible paths through the water, following rules that were written long before humans learned how to watch. Most of what we believe we know about this world comes from brief glimpses. Daylight encounters, carefully framed images, cameras lowered into the water, divers hovering just close enough to feel brave. What we see in those moments feels complete, documented, understandable. But those moments are interruptions. The ocean does not exist for observation. It tolerates it. When vessels arrive, when the shadows fall from above, when foreign shapes descend into the water, the rhythm changes. Not dramatically, not violently, just enough to matter. Roots bend, depths shift, presence becomes restraint. What was open moments ago quietly closes. And when the watchers leave, the water exhales. In places untouched by engines or lights, the ocean behaves differently. Time stretches. Patterns repeat without interruption. Movements occur where no lens can follow at depths. Where sound dissolves and light no longer reaches. Here, behavior is shaped by instinct alone, not reaction. What happens in those hours is rarely seen. The absence of observation creates a different truth, one that leaves no footage behind. No clear evidence, only gaps between what is recorded and what is real. And in those gaps, the ocean keeps its secrets. Because some parts of the wild are not hidden by distance, but by our presence. For decades, the image of sharks has been shaped by what humans are allowed to see. Most encounters happen in the same conditions. Shallow water, clear daylight. Calm seas chosen deliberately for safety and visibility. Cameras drift at predictable depths. Divers remain clustered, cautious, aware of every movement around them. In these moments, sharks appear measured, solitary, moving with slow confidence through open water. This is the version that fills documentaries, research archives, and public memory. In daylight, their paths seem easy to follow. They circle, they pass, they return. Their presence feels controlled, almost rehearsed. Observers note cruising speeds, approach distances, and recognizable patterns of movement. Over time, these repeated observations become the foundation of understanding. Sharks are described as territorial but reserved, curious yet cautious, powerful but predictable. This perception feels stable because it is consistent. Tagged individuals reinforce this image. Electronic signals trace their movements across familiar routes. Lines appear on maps showing migrations that rise and fall with seasons. Depth charts suggest preferred layers of water zones where sharks spend most of their time. From these data points, patterns emerge. From patterns, conclusions form. And those conclusions feel complete. In human-exposed waters, sharks rarely behave unpredictably. They avoid direct contact. They maintain distance. They adjust their course when boats pass overhead or divers enter the water. These reactions are recorded, cataloged, and interpreted as natural caution. Evidence of intelligence. Evidence of restraint. This becomes the accepted norm. The idea settles in. Quietly, sharks are always like this. What is seen during observation becomes what is believed to exist at all times. Daytime footage becomes representative footage. Human presence, becomes the baseline condition. But this baseline is artificial. What appears calm is often compliance. What appears routine may simply be adaptation. The presence of engines' vibrations, light and unfamiliar silhouettes does not provoke aggression, but it does provoke change. Movement becomes deliberate. Speed adjusts. Distances widen. The ocean subtly reorganizes itself around intrusion. Yet because these changes are subtle, they are rarely questioned. The shark gliding past a diver seems unbothered. The tagged individual following a familiar route appears consistent. The behavior fits expectations, and expectations are reinforced by repetition. Over time, the difference between observation and reality fades. This is how a pattern becomes belief. The normal version of sharks is built from moments where nothing goes wrong, where nothing surprises, where presence is tolerated but not challenged. These moments are safe enough to film, stable enough to study, and quiet enough to feel definitive. But they only show one condition. They show how sharks behave when watched. And like all creatures under observation, what is shown may not be what is true, only what is permitted. The first signs of difference are rarely dramatic. They appear quietly in places where expectations no longer line up with observation. In regions studied for years, movement patterns begin to loosen. Routes once considered reliable show interruptions. Depths once labeled preferred are suddenly abandoned for long stretches of time. The data still exists, but it no longer fits cleanly. At first, these deviations are dismissed. Environmental noise, shifting currents, seasonal variation. Small errors that seem inevitable in a system as complex as the ocean. But as observations accumulate, the inconsistencies refuse to disappear. They begin to cluster around one shared condition: absence. In areas with minimal human activity, behavior drifts away from the familiar template. Movement becomes less predictable, not because it is chaotic, but because it no longer follows the rhythms shaped by observation. Sharks travel deeper, remain submerged longer, and surface less frequently. Their presence spreads across wider zones instead of concentrating along known paths. The ocean stops performing. At night, this difference sharpens. Without sunlight piercing the surface, the water reorganizes itself. Thermal layers shift. Sound carries farther. Sensory priority changes. In these hours, sharks that appear solitary during the day begin to move in loose coordination. Not schools, not packs, but proximity that suggests shared timing rather than shared intention. These behaviors are difficult to capture. Cameras placed in daylight miss them. Tags record movement, but not interaction. What emerges is a shadow of activity, directional changes without visible cause, accelerations without recorded triggers, convergences that dissolve before explanation can form. The anomaly grows larger when comparison begins. Tagged sharks provide one narrative. Untagged individuals suggest another. In zones where tracking equipment is common, behavior remains restrained. Depths are conservative. Routes are efficient. Movement aligns with expectation. But beyond those boundaries, patterns loosen. Sharks linger where no data point exists to confirm their presence. They occupy depths rarely associated with routine activity. It is not that they disappear. They simply stop behaving in ways that are easy to document. This divergence challenges a long-held assumption that observed behavior is representative behavior. That what is seen in controlled conditions can stand in for what occurs everywhere else. In untouched waters, the ocean does not reward visibility. It rewards discretion. Sharks adapt accordingly. In places where engines never pass overhead and silhouettes never descend from above, movement becomes less accommodating. Paths curve without explanation. Depth changes occur abruptly. Activity concentrates in intervals too brief to align with observation schedules. What appears random from a distance reveals itself as selective proximity. Timing replaces territory. Opportunity replaces routine. The difference is not aggression. It is intention without display. These sharks are not behaving more violently. They are behaving more privately. Their actions are shaped by internal cues rather than external interruption. Without the need to account for observers, they conserve energy differently. They choose routes based on conditions humans rarely measure. They engage with their environment on terms that do not translate well to charts or footage. This is where understanding begins to fracture, because the familiar version, the shark that glides slowly past a diver, the one that follows a clean migratory line, exists within a narrow window. A window created by visibility, accessibility, and safety. Outside of it, the ocean offers no guarantees, only patterns that resist recording. As more untouched zones are examined, the gap widens. Behavior observed under human presence becomes the exception rather than the rule. The anomaly is no longer isolated. It repeats quietly across regions that share one feature: silence. No engines, no lights, no intrusion. In these places, sharks are not reacting. They are simply existing. And that difference between reaction and existence marks the point where certainty begins to dissolve. What was once considered normal now appears conditional. What was once believed complete begins to feel partial. The ocean has not changed, only the conditions under which it was observed. The difference becomes impossible to ignore when movement accelerates. What once appeared as subtle deviation sharpens into contrast. In the absence of human presence, the ocean no longer maintains the measured pace familiar to daytime observation. Motion becomes decisive. Space is used more aggressively, not in violence, but in intent. Distances collapse. Depth changes occur without warning. Timing tightens. This is where the familiar image breaks. At night, sharks no longer drift. They arrive. Without light shaping the surface, the water transforms into a three-dimensional field of information. Sound replaces sight. Pressure shifts signal opportunity. In these conditions, sharks abandon the slow gliding patrols captured by cameras. Their movement becomes direct, purposeful, and fleeting. They do not circle. They intersect. Individuals that appeared solitary under observation now move in overlapping paths. Not coordinated in the way humans recognize as teamwork, but synchronized by conditions. When prey moves, response is immediate. When opportunity closes, pursuit ends without hesitation. There is no spectacle here, no prolonged chase designed for visibility, no dramatic escalation that invites recording. Action happens in compressed intervals, bursts of speed followed by immediate withdrawal. Energy is conserved. Exposure is minimized. This is behavior optimized for success, not for observation. In zones where human activity is common, these patterns rarely appear. Sharks maintain distance. They slow their approach. They adjust angles to remain visible, predictable, non-threatening. This restraint has long been mistaken for temperament. But restraint is not nature. It is adaptation. When the watchers disappear, adaptation gives way to efficiency. Depth usage shifts dramatically. Sharks descend into layers rarely occupied during daylight encounters. They rise quickly, strike, and vanish again. Vertical movement replaces horizontal patrols. The ocean becomes layered with activity, each level serving a different function. What looks empty from above is active below. This escalation exposes a critical misunderstanding. Sharks have not been conserving energy because they are passive. They have been conserving energy because they are precise. Observation distorts this precision, flattening behavior into something easier to follow, easier to film, easier to explain. Without that distortion, the ocean reveals a different rhythm. Movement is faster because it must be. Decisions are shorter because hesitation is costly. The environment does not reward prolonged presence. It rewards timing, accuracy, withdrawal. Here, sharks do not dominate space. They pass through it. This is especially visible in untouched zones where patterns repeat without interruption. Over time, these behaviors stabilize not into predictability, but into consistency. Night after night, movement aligns with conditions rather than schedules. Sharks appear where prey concentrates, not where cameras expect them. They abandon routes the moment efficiency declines. There is no loyalty to territory, only to advantage. The contrast with daylight footage becomes stark. The slow-moving silhouettes familiar to audiences feel incomplete now, stripped of context. Those images captured a fraction of behavior, filtered through the presence of observers. What unfolds in darkness feels more honest, more aligned with survival. And yet it remains largely unseen, because this escalation resists documentation. Cameras struggle in low light. Tags report position, but not intention. The most decisive moments leave no trace beyond disturbed water and sudden absence. This is not a more dangerous shark. It is a more authentic one. The idea that sharks are predictable predators collapses here. Their behavior is not fixed. It is conditional. It responds not only to environment, but to attention. Observation alters tempo. Presence reshapes decision-making. When attention vanishes, sharks reclaim speed. They do not behave wildly. They behave efficiently. Every movement serves a purpose. Every appearance is brief. Every retreat is immediate. There is no need to linger, no need to display. This is escalation not through aggression, but through clarity. And clarity is unsettling, because it suggests that the calm, composed shark so often portrayed is not the default state, but a moderated version, a performance shaped by proximity, a behavior filtered through awareness of being seen. Once that filter is removed, what remains is sharper, faster, less accommodating. The ocean does not become chaotic. It becomes exact. And in that exactness, the gap between what is observed and what exists grows wider. What humans have learned to recognize no longer matches what unfolds beyond view. The escalation is complete not when danger increases, but when certainty collapses. Because the shark that waits patiently in clear water may only exist for the camera. The one that moves unseen does not wait at all. Silence in the ocean is not emptiness. It is space where observation ends. Between the moments we record and the moments we miss, entire patterns unfold without witnesses. Vast stretches of water exist beyond the reach of cameras, beyond the schedules of research vessels, beyond the assumptions built from limited access. In these places, behavior is not shaped by interruption. It continues uninterrupted, repeating in rhythms that leave no visible trace. This is where understanding thins. Most footage captures presence, what happens when something enters the frame. What remains undocumented is absence. Hours where nothing is seen, not because nothing occurs, but because nothing announces itself. Sharks do not occupy these spaces visibly. They pass through them, leaving only brief disturbances that dissolve almost instantly. Without light, without sound, without intrusion, movement becomes quieter rather than slower. In untouched zones, sharks do not patrol. They wait. Not in stillness, but in restraint. Their paths narrow, their timing sharpens. Energy is preserved for moments that matter. The ocean here does not reward constant motion. It rewards patience without display. These behaviors resist recording because they are not continuous. They appear resolve and vanish before equipment can react. A sudden convergence, a brief acceleration, a shift in depth that lasts seconds. By the time instruments adjust, the moment is past. What remains is silence, misinterpreted as inactivity. This misinterpretation is costly because silence suggests absence, and absence suggests irrelevance. Areas without footage are labeled empty. Zones without repeated encounters are dismissed as transitional. But these spaces are not vacant. They are simply uncooperative. They do not align with human timelines or methods. Here, sharks behave in ways that do not seek validation. They do not remain within range. They do not repeat actions for confirmation. Their presence is conditional, shaped by opportunity rather than routine. When conditions fade, so does activity. There is no reason to linger. In these environments, the most important behaviors leave no record. Feeding events occur quickly and conclude completely. Interactions between individuals happen without ceremony. Brief alignments rather than prolonged contact. Movement is reduced to what is necessary, nothing more. The ocean remains visually unchanged, even as life within it remains active. This is the silence that defines the gap between data and reality, between what is measured and what is lived, between what is shown and what persists unseen. In this gap, assumptions grow fragile. The idea that behavior must be visible to be significant begins to fracture. Sharks do not fill space to be noticed. They occupy it to survive. When observation retreats, their behavior does not expand, it contracts. Activity becomes efficient. Exposure is minimized. The ocean becomes a series of thresholds rather than a continuous stage. Crossing these thresholds requires timing, not visibility. This is why the absence of footage matters. It is not missing information. It is information shaped by refusal. The ocean withholds what it does not need to reveal. And sharks shaped by that environment do the same. Their most effective behaviors do not repeat often enough to become patterns. They exist as moments that vanish without evidence. In this silence, human narratives lose authority. The stories built from repeated observation no longer apply. What remains cannot be summarized neatly or mapped clearly. It resists simplification. This resistance is not intentional. It is ecological. The ocean does not reward persistence in one place. It rewards adaptability. Sharks tuned to this reality do not behave in ways that favor long-term documentation. They move where advantage appears and leave when it fades. Silence becomes the rule, not the exception. And within that silence, the assumption that behavior must be visible to be understood quietly dissolves. What humans interpret as inactivity may be the most refined state of engagement. What appears empty may be precisely calibrated. The ocean remains unchanged to the eye, but beneath that stillness, choices are made. Movements occur. Interactions resolve themselves without record. Life continues in forms that do not require confirmation. This is not mystery for its own sake. It is the natural outcome of a system that never evolved to be seen. And in that system, sharks do not announce their presence. They let silence do the work. Human presence does not arrive as force. It arrives as change. Long before contact occurs, the ocean registers intrusion. Vibrations travel through water faster than sound through air. Pressure shifts, ripple outward. Even distant movement leaves a signature that does not belong. For creatures shaped by sensitivity, this information arrives early, long before engines are visible or silhouettes descend. Sharks do not need to see humans to respond. They feel them. This response has often been misunderstood. Avoidance is labeled fear. Distance is labeled caution. Altered movement is interpreted as passivity. But these interpretations rely on a human framework, one that assumes reaction must be emotional to be meaningful. In reality, the adjustment is mechanical. When unfamiliar signals enter the environment, sharks modify their behavior the way currents redirect flow. Roots bend, depth changes, timing shifts, not because of panic, but because efficiency demands it. Exposure increases risk. Visibility invites interference. The presence of observers becomes a variable that must be accounted for. This is not learning in the human sense. It is calibration. In regions where boats pass regularly and divers appear predictably, sharks begin to operate within narrower margins. They approach slowly. They withdraw sooner. They maintain angles that preserve escape options. These behaviors are subtle enough to appear neutral, even calm. But they are not default. They are conditional. Remove the condition and the calibration dissolves. In areas where human presence is rare or non-existent, the same species behave differently, not wildly, but freely. They occupy depths avoided elsewhere. They move through open water without hesitation. They converge briefly, then separate without lingering. The ocean becomes less performative, more exact. The difference lies not in aggression, but in constraint. Observation imposes boundaries. Not physical ones, but behavioral limits shaped by anticipation. Sharks under observation behave as if interruption is possible. Sharks without it behave as if only outcome matters. This distinction reframes everything that came before. Much of what is known about sharks is built from encounters where humans were already present. Research vessels, tagged individuals, controlled environments where safety dictated conditions. These encounters are valuable, but they are incomplete. They capture behavior under influence, not behavior in isolation. Human presence becomes the silent filter. It slows movement. It stretches time. It turns decisive action into measured response. In this filtered state, sharks appear predictable. Their behavior aligns with expectation, because expectation shapes the conditions under which they are seen. But expectation does not exist in untouched waters. There, the ocean operates without interruption. Timing is not adjusted for visibility. Movement is not softened for interpretation. Sharks act according to cues humans rarely register. Pressure gradients, chemical traces, faint vibrations that signal opportunity or risk. In these environments, behavior sharpens. Decisions are made quickly because hesitation carries cost. Paths are chosen for efficiency, not consistency. The ocean is navigated as a shifting field of advantage rather than a fixed map of routes. This is where the contrast becomes undeniable. The shark that avoids a diver is not revealing temperament. It is responding to a variable. The shark that alters depth beneath a boat is not displaying curiosity. It is optimizing distance. These responses are intelligent, but they are not the core behavior. They are adaptations layered on top of something more fundamental. When that layer is removed, what remains is not chaos. It is clarity. Sharks without observers do not waste movement. They do not repeat actions for confirmation. They do not linger in exposed spaces. Their presence becomes intermittent, precise, and difficult to anticipate. The ocean ceases to behave like a stage and returns to functioning as a system. Human presence disrupts this system gently but persistently, not through harm, but through attention. Attention changes outcomes. It introduces delay. It creates hesitation where none is needed. Over time, sharks learn not consciously, but evolutionarily, that visibility correlates with interference. The response is not fear. It is avoidance without drama. This is why footage feels incomplete, because the most efficient behaviors occur where attention cannot follow. The most decisive moments resolve themselves without witnesses. What remains visible is what survives interruption, not what defines survival. Understanding this reframes the narrative entirely. Sharks are not misrepresented because they are misunderstood. They are misrepresented because they are observed. The act of watching alters the subject. The presence of the observer reshapes behavior, flattening complexity into something accessible. This is not unique to sharks. But in the ocean, where visibility is already limited, the effect is magnified. What humans see becomes the minority condition. What remains unseen becomes the rule. The ocean does not correct this imbalance. It simply continues, and sharks shaped by millions of years of refinement respond accordingly. They adapt not to humans as threats, but to humans as variables, unpredictable, intrusive, temporary. When those variables disappear, so does the need for adjustment. Behavior contracts to its most efficient form. Movement accelerates. Exposure decreases. The ocean becomes quieter, not because life retreats, but because it no longer needs to signal. This is the culmination of the pattern, not a revelation of danger, but a revelation of limitation. Human knowledge reaches its boundary, not because sharks are unknowable, but because knowing requires conditions that alter what is known. In the end, the presence of humans explains less about sharks than their absence ever could. When the ocean settles back into stillness, nothing appears to have changed. The surface smooths itself. Light returns to familiar angles. From above, the water offers the same calm impression it always has. The same openness. The same invitation to believe that what is visible is what exists. But beneath that surface, the system continues on its own terms. Movement resumes without urgency. Paths cross briefly, then separate. Depths are occupied and abandoned without trace. Decisions are made and resolved without display. The ocean does not pause to explain itself, and it does not require recognition to function. What remains unseen is not hidden by distance. It is hidden by condition. The version of sharks that humans recognize emerges only when certain variables are present. Light access, attention. Remove those variables and behavior compresses into something quieter and more exact. Less accommodating, less visible, more complete. This does not mean that the familiar image is false. It means it is partial. The ocean does not offer its full complexity to observation. It never has. What it reveals is shaped by interruption, filtered through safety and accessibility. What remains unseen is not an absence of activity, but an absence of invitation. Sharks do not resist understanding. They simply do not prioritize it. Their existence is not defined by what can be recorded, mapped, or categorized. It is defined by efficiency, timing, and restraint. The most important actions occur where visibility offers no advantage, where silence preserves outcome, where presence would interfere. In these spaces, the ocean operates without narrative. There is no performance, no repetition for confirmation, no need to establish patterns that align with expectation. Life continues as it always has, measured not by documentation, but by survival. Human knowledge reaches its edge here, not because the ocean is unknowable, but because knowing depends on conditions that alter what is known. Observation clarifies some behaviors while obscuring others. What is gained in visibility is often lost in accuracy. This is the quiet contradiction at the center of understanding the wild. The more closely it is watched, the less completely it is revealed. When attention withdraws, the ocean does not become empty. It becomes precise. Behavior tightens. Exposure fades. What remains is not chaos, but alignment life, moving according to cues older than observation, guided by forces that do not require acknowledgement. In the end, the ocean keeps nothing secret. It simply continues without concern for who is watching. And the sharks within it do the same.